Every dollar in your wallet is a political decision, not an economic one. Most people think the US dollar is powerful because America has a strong economy. That is partially true, but it is not the whole story. The real reason the dollar rules the world has almost nothing to do with markets. It has everything to do with a secret agreement made in the wreckage of World War II. An agreement that gave one country control over the financial oxygen that the rest of the world breathes. And once you understand it, you will never look at money the same way again. Have you ever wondered why your country's currency sometimes crashes, even when nothing in your country actually changed? Why a drought in Brazil can make groceries more expensive in Ohio? Why a political speech in Washington can collapse the stock market in Seoul? We live in a world that feels impossibly connected, and yet most of us have no idea what holds it all together. The answer is one currency, one flag, one country at the center of everything. Right now, roughly 88% of all international foreign exchange transactions involve the US dollar. Nearly 60% of all global foreign currency reserves are held in dollars. And around 40% of all global debt is denominated in dollars. That means when the US Federal Reserve raises interest rates by just 0.25%, governments in Argentina, Turkey, Nigeria, and Pakistan feel the impact immediately. Their currencies weaken, their imports get more expensive, their citizens pay more for food, medicine, and fuel. This is not a conspiracy. It is a system that was deliberately designed. And it started in a small mountain resort in New Hampshire in July 1944. Meet James. James is 41 years old. He manages a mid-sized import business in Memphis, Tennessee. His company buys electronics from factories in Vietnam and sells them to retailers across the American South. He employs 22 people. He works 60 hours a week. James is not rich, but he has built something real. In 2022, James hit a wall. The Federal Reserve began one of the most aggressive interest rate hiking cycles in American history. In just 16 months, they raised rates from near zero to over 5%. James did not fully understand what that meant. He just knew his supplier in Ho Chi Minh City suddenly needed more dollars per shipment. His shipping costs spiked. His credit line became more expensive. But his customers, American retailers, were not paying him more. They were actually buying less. James got squeezed from both sides. He could not understand how a decision made in Washington, D.C. had such direct consequences on a business in Memphis that had nothing to do with finance. He was not alone. Hundreds of thousands of small businesses across America, and millions more around the world, felt the same pressure that year. What James did not know was that this was the system working exactly as designed. July 1944. The war in Europe is not yet over, but the Allies are winning. 730 delegates from 44 countries travel to Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their mission: design the financial system of the post-war world. Europe is in ruins. Britain, France, and Germany have spent themselves to the brink of collapse. The United States, by contrast, has emerged from the war more powerful than when it entered. America holds roughly 2/3 of the world's gold at that moment. Its factories are intact. Its cities are unburned. So the deal made sense in a cold and practical way. The agreement reached at Bretton Woods was simple. Every other currency in the world would be pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar would be backed by gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. In theory, any country could walk into a Federal Reserve Bank and exchange their dollars for gold. The dollar was as good as gold. This gave America enormous credibility, and it gave the world a stable foundation for international trade. But it also meant something else. It meant that for the global economy to grow, the world needed more dollars. and dollars could only come from one place: the United States Federal Reserve. This was the first hidden rule. Global growth had been quietly outsourced to one country's central bank. The economist Robert Triffin spotted this flaw almost immediately. He argued that America would eventually face an impossible choice. To supply the world with enough dollars, the U.S. would have to run persistent trade deficits. But running those deficits would eventually undermine confidence in the dollar itself. This paradox became known as the Triffin dilemma, and everything that followed proved him right. By the late 1960s, the cracks were showing. America had spent massively on the Vietnam War and Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs. More dollars were flowing out into the world than America had gold to back them. Countries, especially France, started to notice. French President Charles de Gaulle was one of the most vocal critics of the dollar system. He called it an exorbitant privilege. In 1965, France began sending ships across the Atlantic to exchange its dollar reserves for gold. Physically, on ships. Other countries followed. The gold at Fort Knox started to move. By 1971, the situation had become untenable. On a Sunday night in August, President Richard Nixon went on national television. He announced he was suspending, temporarily, the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Temporarily lasted forever. With one speech, Nixon destroyed the Bretton Woods system. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the United States government. Most economists predicted disaster. If the dollar was not backed by gold, why would anyone trust it? The answer came from an unlikely place: the Saudi Arabian desert. In 1973, the Nixon administration struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. The terms were brutally simple. Saudi Arabia would price all of its oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, America would provide military protection and weapons to the Saudi royal family. By 1975, every member of OPEC had agreed to the same arrangement. The petrodollar was born. This was the second hidden rule. The dollar was not backed by gold anymore. It was backed by oil. And since every country on Earth needs oil to function, every country on Earth needs dollars. James, in his Memphis warehouse, did not know any of this. But every time he paid his supplier in Vietnam, he was participating in a system built in the Nixon White House 50 years ago. Here is how the machine actually works. Step 1. A country, let us say South Korea, wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. Do that, South Korea needs dollars, not Korean won, dollars. So South Korea sells goods, cars, electronics, steel to American consumers. American consumers pay in dollars. South Korea accumulates those dollars. Step 2. South Korea does not want to just sit on dollars. So it buys U.S. Treasury bonds, essentially lending that money back to the American government. This gives South Korea a safe place to store value, and it gives the U.S. government a constant stream of cheap financing. Step 3. The U.S. government uses that financing to spend more than it earns. Building infrastructure, funding its military, running budget deficits that would be catastrophic for any other country. But for America, it is manageable, because there will always be buyers for U.S. Treasury bonds, because there will always be countries that need dollars. This circular system has a name. Economists call it the dollar recycling loop. Consider what happened in 2008. The U.S. financial system nearly collapsed. American banks had made trillions of dollars in bad bets. And yet, when global panic set in, investors from around the world rushed toward the dollar, not away from it. The dollar strengthened during the crisis it caused. This is what economists call the safe haven paradox. The dollar is so deeply embedded in the global system that even when America fails, the world still needs dollars to survive. Or consider the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Thailand, South Korea, Indonesia. These economies had borrowed heavily in dollars. When the dollar strengthened, their debts became impossible to repay. The IMF stepped in with bailout packages. Those packages came with conditions. Countries had to cut government spending, privatize state companies, open their markets. The crisis was not caused by bad decisions in Bangkok or Seoul. It was caused, in large part, by the structural power of a currency they did not control. There is a question that economists have debated for decades. Is the dollar's dominance good for America? The answer is, it depends on who you are in America. For the U.S. government, reserve currency status is extraordinary. It can borrow cheaply. It can run deficits that would destroy any other economy. It can sanction entire countries by cutting them off from the dollar system. In 2022, the U.S. and its allies froze approximately $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves, not with bombs, with spreadsheets. For Wall Street and American financial institutions, dollar dominance is a license to print money. Literally. But for James in Memphis, and for millions of American workers like him, the picture is more complicated, because the dollar's reserve status also makes it structurally overvalued. And an overvalued dollar makes American exports more expensive, which makes it harder for American manufacturers to compete globally. This is part of why American manufacturing hollowed out over the past 40 years, not just because of trade deals, because of the dollar. The economist Barry Eichengreen estimated that reserve currency status gives the U.S. an interest rate advantage worth tens of billions of dollars per year. But the cost of that advantage is paid partly by American workers whose jobs moved overseas. The exorbitant privilege comes with an exorbitant price. It is just not the same people who pay it. Now, the system is changing. China, Russia, Brazil, India, and South Africa, the BRICS nations, have been quietly building alternative payment systems, settling trade in local currencies, accumulating gold instead of dollars. Saudi Arabia has begun discussing oil sales in currencies other than the dollar. This does not mean the dollar is about to collapse. Reserve currencies change slowly. The British pound dominated global trade for over a century before ceding to the dollar. But for the first time since 1944, the architecture of the dollar system is being seriously questioned. And whoever shapes what comes next will hold the same power that America has held for 80 years. James eventually figured it out. Not all of it. Nobody figures out all of it. But he started to understand that the pressures on his business were not random. They were structural. The decisions that affected his bottom line were not made in Memphis. They were made in Washington, and in Riyadh, and in the conference rooms of the Federal Reserve. Every dollar he handled carried a hidden history. A history of wars, negotiations, oil deals, and political agreements that stretched back decades. We use money every day. We think of it as neutral, a simple tool for exchange. But money is never neutral. Every currency reflects a power structure. Every transaction is embedded in a political system. Every dollar in your wallet is the product of a choice made by people you never elected, at a table you were never invited to. The question is not whether the system is fair. It is not. The question is whether you understand it. Because the people who built this system understood exactly what they were doing. And the people who are building the next one understand it too.